In 1962, Pyotr Patrushev did an amazing thing. He swam from the Soviet Union to Turkey. So there you are in Turkey. What happens after that?
So Turkey was unexpected completely. I didn't know what was going to happen. However, as somebody who had crossed the border, and I was the only successful unaided swimmer since the Second World War, Turks didn't believe my story. They thought I was a spy. And they put me into a solitary confinement in a place called Erzurum in the northern Turkey and interrogated me for about a year. After which they released me into a detention camp in Istanbul. So I spent another year and a half in the detention camp for refugees, after which I migrated to Australia.
By the way, when they interrogated, did they torture you or?
They were sort of more like, I've got beaten up once, but mostly psychological pressure. So lack of sleep deprivation, very small room, like maybe 3 meters by 2 meters. And then they would threaten to shoot me a few times. If you keep doing that, no one can protect you, can take you out and shoot you.
So what made them stop? Why did they give up?
What made them stop? I finally got tired of it. I was losing sleep and I thought it could drag forever. And so I said to the officer who was interrogating me, there were a couple, and I said to the most vicious one, I said, what if I admit I'm a spy? I'm tired of it, so you help me to concoct the story as if I was a spy. You get another star on your shoulder strap. I'll get some kind of a respite and all that. And he just looked at me quizzically and he realized we've reached the end of the line. He sort of went out in a huff from the interrogation room, and then the whole thing changed. They decided, well, that's enough. He said he's a spy, let him go.
So you never formally admitted you were a spy?
No, of course, how could I admit that? But what kind of a spy? 20-year-old young man who spent time training, who was actually hunted by the KGB. Later on suspicion that I was actually recruited by the CIA, because what happened is that there was a high-level intrigue, as I found out much later on, from a letter that was sent to me by the daughter of my coach in the city of Tomsk, from which I was recruited into the Army Sports Club, a kind of a elite sports unit where professional sportsmen were trained.
Yeah, I was wondering how come you were in that ideal situation in this elite club with the opportunity to travel overseas and everything, and suddenly you get kicked out of that.
Well, I was
Why?
wondering about it for years until I received this letter, which described in detail what happened to my coach after I escaped, you see. And what the whole history was that the head of our swimming pool, the man by the name of Shkolnik, that's all I know, his last name, because my coach is still afraid to talk about it very much. Only his wife wrote in this letter and the daughter. And so this guy Shkolnik was actually a henchman of Beria, who was the most fearsome secret police chief under Stalin. When Beria was shot, this guy got out of it and was sent in a kind of a sinecure, cushy position, being a head of the swimming pool in Tomsk city. A very powerful, very influential person. I didn't know anything of that. His niece was my coach,
First coach,
who brought me up to, let's say, district, kind of a state standard. And as often happens with sports people, I wanted to go with a better coach who just arrived, a guy by the name of Bulakin. And so I said, look, I'd like to just go with this coach. And she obviously got upset, went to her uncle, who is this powerful ex-secret police person, and said, look, he betrayed me. And the guy said, I'll destroy both of them. And from that point
on... you and the coach?
Me and the coach, and the coach's family. And totally unbeknown to me then, he obviously, once I was recruited into the Army Sports Club, he made a phone call to the KGB officer in the club and said, destroy this guy, do whatever it takes. And so I was put into this ordinary unit, subjected to hazing, ultimately probably would have killed me or maimed me. I got out of it by feigning a psychiatric disorder, got into a psychiatric institution, was finally escaped from that, got to Batumi, this is prehistory now, and swam to Turkey.
Right.
My coach in the meantime lost his job, they were sacked, they lost their apartment, And wherever he traveled in the Soviet Union later on, trying to evade this history, they would telephone in advance and say, this man comes in, who is really persona non grata. He ended up in Belarus, finally, where he's now an old man, very, very sick. And so his life, he could have been, he actually, even in that very terrible situation, he still made a few champions, like youth European champions. So he's obviously a very good coach, but his life was destroyed. I've been helping him all these years and communicating with his children.
So how do you feel to inadvertently have been the author of his downfall?
Well, it's I feel kind of in a curious way responsible, because through the contact with me, his life probably would have been completely different if he never, if I never went in contact with him. But at the same time, it's like, running over somebody on the road who is drunk or something like that. You feel terrible. You feel responsible for that. But it's not really your fault because the person just stepped out in front of the car. Well, he and I stepped out in front of this huge repressive state machinery that was so arbitrary and so cruel and so powerful that one telephone call could destroy a person's career, could send him, first into mental institution and then into, swimming to Turkey. Well, my part, although I've lost my country, I lost my family in a way, and my life was totally disrupted. I spent a year and a half in terrible situation in a detention camp in Turkey, and a year in solitary confinement. All that, but nothing compared to really somebody like him who was living in poverty and under kind of repressive regime. So as I said, all I could do was just help him and his children.
Right. So. As you say, you only found that out relatively recently.
Yes,
You got
yes.
that letter.
Yes.
And the woman who wrote the letter was the wife of that guy?
The wife, yeah. Sophie Bulakin. She was herself she was kind of Olympic standard virtually, downhill skier, bright woman, still kind of feisty at the age, I think, of 85 now.
So what prompted her years later to tell you this?
They read a book which was published in Russia in 2005 and sold out, the whole edition sold out in Russia, which describes my whole journey.
Ah.
So they read it.
And they feature in it?
Yeah. And their names are featured in it, and all the documentation, everything is in there. And so then, then they contacted me because I'm easy to find on the internet. And so I received this letter, which was an utter shock to me. It was like really made me think. Brought the whole thing right back. Actually, what had happened, and to think that I could have, affected some people's life in that way was really quite a dreadful.
So what's her name?
Sophie Bulakin.
So what is the tone of the letter? Is it recriminatory or?
It's not directly recriminatory, but it does. By listing all the misfortunes, and it's a long letter, that they have suffered, and it could have been that it's such a system that things could have happened to them anyway, but, this was just after they encountered me. That was indirectly basically saying that our lives have changed once you crossed our threshold of our home. And I had to draw. She did not emotionally incriminate. She in fact said, you should be in Russia now. You should be trying to change that system. Yeah. She's had very positive and exaggerated view, I think, of my import, because I was interpreting at a high level, writing books and all that. She thought that I could really change something in Russia, So she had basically positive appreciation, but she did at that time, me as a person that they've met. There's an implication that their life have changed for the terrible as a result of it.
So she's calling on you as somebody she perceives as a Russian who's overseas, who's now powerful.
Yes.
To come back and change the system.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I spoke to her on the phone, and she was saying, you should be there. You should be doing something, and that you could affect the system.
And what did you say?
I said, I'll think about it. I had once been sentenced to death and put into a psychiatric institution. I'm a bit older. I can't swim as well now anymore. So, we'll wait.
So, anything to wrap up? You've had a long career since then, not only writing but interpreting and so on. at the highest levels.
Yes. So my very briefly, my kind of career in the West began by coaching swimmers in Australia.
Yeah.
Then I was hired after passing some exams by the BBC World Service.
Yeah.
And external broadcasting. I went there. I spent about 3 years on the staff working there, doing all kinds of things in the Russian language. After that, I left and I was working for Radio Liberty in Munich. Then I became a science writer and broadcaster in San Francisco.
Is it all after coming to Australia? Or
All after coming to Australia. So I left Australia fairly quickly.
did you?
Yeah. It was kind of a little bit dull, you know. I mean, I was very grateful for the safety and security, and I really enjoyed the nature and all that, but I wanted intellectual stimulation. I was still fired up with all these Russian ideas, you know, reading Bertrand Russell and Camus, and, you know, and London was beautiful. You know, in the 60s, end of 60s, London was the time, the intellectual turmoil, student revolution. So BBC, then Munich, then San Francisco, and really got very much involved in kind of science writing. And as a result of that, one of the things, you know, there are a couple of books that I've written, but this is a recent publication, came out in the United States. It was a bit of a fanciful one. It's a kind of a science truth novel a la Orwell and Huxley, which describes how in Russia, they, because the country was basically in the Soviet times, at Brezhnev times, it's a fiction of course, the country was being destroyed by vodka and coming alcohol and drug addiction.
The whole country was an alcoholic.
Yeah. And so Brezhnev, whom I call Glavny in the book, decides to, after some experiments with natives of Siberia, to go back to something like the old mushrooms, you know, like the Amanita muscaria. And to replace it because it never harmed any of the natives, you know, and they were being killed by vodka. So let's do the whole thing in the country as such. And so this is a fictional account of what happened to Soviet Russia after they replaced vodka with the psychedelic mushroom.
Well, now, in Swiftian terms of a modest proposal, do you think this is really sensible?
Well, it's happening now in a much more limited way, you know, in that there's certainly people who have been advocating for a long time something like that, saying that it's going to change this and that. I think it's going to take a long time. It will come because we have aging population, we have obesity, we have all kinds of health crises, and this could be very helpful. But I'm not impatient. I know how long these things change, and all my job as a writer was really to postulate the best outcomes I could for humanity, for Russia, for society.
Well, we'll wait to see what chapter 5 of this story will produce.